John Creasy here. So today we're going to have a chat about Jordan Peterson and his approach to the equity debate. Just before we get started, I'd like to say that despite the title of this video, I have nothing personal against Professor Peterson. There's quite a lot of things that the guy says that I agree with and some things that I don't agree with, which is all good. But it's precisely that I do agree with him on this point that I need to make this video. Peterson has become pretty prominent in the last few years, and he's looked up to in certain circles, to the point where you could almost say that he's developed a cult of personality around himself. For that reason, combined with the perception of authority that he has as a university professor, what he says is taken pretty seriously by many people. And that means that when he says things, his followers believe him, sometimes uncritically, and sometimes these people repeat the information that he says to a broader audience. The problem with that is that he's the kind of guy that is constantly talking all the time. And sometimes it's pretty clear that he's talking about things that he has not thought through. Now, no one's infallible. I'm fucking not. And this guy, he's the same. He's not infallible either. And when he does get some things wrong, then he has the capacity to do some damage. Hence, this video.
Next, equality. Equity, that's worse, right? Equity means equality of outcome. It means that every single organization has 50% women and 50% men. Doesn't matter whether the men and women differ in their intrinsic preferences, which, by the way, they do.
Okay, so this statement right here is what I have a problem with. Mate, your definition is wrong. And definitions matter. And incidentally, Peterson agrees, as he indicates in this tweet right here. Now, you might accuse me of pedantry, but it's not, right? Focusing on the definition of a word, words are actually important. They're important for rhetorical purposes, especially in politics. And that's why what we have to say here is pretty important to get right. What equity actually means is fairness. That's all. That's all it means. Nothing's prescribed about what fairness means. Doesn't describe what is fair, doesn't describe what is not fair. We all have our own view on what's fair, and that's precisely why we have political disagreements and political debates in the first place. It's why politics exists. My vision of an equitable society is very different probably than yours, and that's fine. The SJWs may very well have something that differs again. They might think that it's equality of outcome, but we don't have to agree with them. Maybe someone might think that meritocracy is fair. If it's fair, it's equitable. There's an argument to be made on either side of that point. The point I'm making here really is that equity is subjective. It is not just one thing, or if it is, then we as a society haven't decided on what that one thing is. What Peterson is actually doing by defining equity as equality of outcome is agreeing with the SJWs. He's saying that equality of outcome is a fair system. Now, I don't think he actually believes that. I think he's just got his terminology wrong. Now, I understand that the term equity has been used in the past to justify things like affirmative action, but the description of this kind of policy as equitable is contentious, and it should be contentious. I disagree with the opinion that affirmative action is fair. And I think Jordan Peterson would disagree if what I gather from his videos is any indication. But here's another issue. It's true that sometimes the SJWs define equity as equality of outcome, but I'm not sure that they're consistent on this point. So let's pick apart a few examples. Now, I'm specifically going to choose here ones that have been tweeted out by Jordan Peterson. That means that I know that he's seen them. So look at this thing. So this is a variation on a meme that's been floating around the internet. If you Google images the word equity, you will get a meme that looks pretty similar to this, but I'm using this version because it was attached to Jordan Peterson's tweet. There's other versions, they say pretty much the same thing. So in this image, the scenario on the right is labeled equity. And according to the author of the image, this is what equity is. That doesn't mean that everyone else has to agree. In this system, some people get more boxes than others, or I suppose more entitlements, which is what the boxes represent. So all people can get an apple because all people have the appropriate amount of entitlements that allows them to get the apple. The argument here being that some people need more entitlements than others to get the same outcome. So in one sense, this is equality of outcome because everyone gets one apple. But in another sense, it actually isn't, because some people get more entitlements than others, and surely the amount of entitlements that you get from a system is an outcome. What this really is the Marxist idea of to each according to his needs, and not represented in the diagram, but we presume also from each according to his ability. It is a Marxist conception of equity, and that does not mean that this is the only conception of equity. And because this requires an unequal distribution of entitlements, it relies on the people doling out those entitlements to correctly assess the need of each person receiving them, which in the real world, let's be honest, is practically impossible. So to the person that created this image, he's labeled the scenario on the left as equality. Here, everyone gets one box regardless of who they are. So we could view this as, well, perhaps equality of opportunity, since they all have equal opportunity to reach the apple. But here's a question. Who produced the boxes? I don't know. They just appear, don't they? Everyone gets one box regardless of how much they work in the box factory, producing the boxes, which exists somewhere. So from one perspective, the image on the left could also be seen as equality of outcome. All these people get an equal amount of entitlements. Now, it's just because these people are Marxists that they gloss over the production aspect of this system. How are the entitlements produced? Well, who knows? They're just produced somehow, because apparently they drop from the sky. So I know this is just a meme, but we can't ask too much of it right because it's just a meme. Anyway, this sort of supports Jordan Peterson's interpretation of what the SJWs do think. But let's have a look at a different example that was also tweeted out by Peterson. This is the Equity and Diversity Policy of the Toronto District School Board. Okay, so we can see here that the purpose of the policy is to push equity and not equality. That's important. As you see in the tweet, Peterson is uncritically accepting that this is the definition of equity. So let's have a look at what Toronto U's definition of equity is.
Equity, the provision of opportunities for equality for all by responding to the needs of individuals. Equity of treatment is not the same as equal treatment because it includes acknowledging historical and present systemic discrimination against identified groups and removing barriers, eliminating discrimination, and remedying the impact of past discrimination.
So here's the question. Is this definition of equity compatible with the one from the meme? Is this policy implementing equality of outcome or to each according to his need? Well, no, it isn't. The key word here is past discrimination, not current discrimination, mind, discrimination in the past. Now, the language being used in this definition is pretty garbled, but it starts out talking about individuals. Then when it's talking about historical discrimination, I'm assuming that it means collective discrimination. It's not referring to, for example, discrimination against that person as an individual, but more other people in their group. It is not specified, but let's be honest, this is most likely how the policy will be implemented. For example, it is there to protect either minorities or women or people of a sexual orientation or what have you, not the majority. Now, this definition of equity is effectively Toronto saying that they will provide reparations for injustices that may or may not have occurred in the past, presumably not to this individual job applicant, but to people that simply share superficial traits with that job applicant, like having the same skin color or having the same gender or sexual orientation. This policy is saying that it will provide a superior outcome for people in these groups and not people in other groups, and it's calling this equity. Now, that is not equality of outcome. The official policy of Toronto District School Board is that in their minds, in a fair society, some groups will be privileged over others. Yes, this is sneaky. Yes, this should be opposed. And yes, these people are supremacists. But the point being is that these people have a different conception of equity, different to ours, and it is subjective. This is the point that I was making. It is subjective what equity is. So by saying that equity is equality of outcome, what Jordan Peterson is doing is ceding ground that I don't think that he intends to give up. But without intending to, he is saying that the SJWs are correct and that in his view, equality of outcome is fair. Then he is saying that he doesn't want equity, so he is opposing a fair society. I don't think that this is what he means to say. It is just a literal interpretation of what he is saying. So in terms of optics, this is a horrible approach. The point being is that Peterson's rhetoric is poorly chosen, and this matters because Peterson has a high profile. He is an influencer, which gives him some amount of power to change how his followers talk about this issue, and he does at this point have very many followers. The rhetoric they are using in opposing the SJWs is being tainted by this. If he gets this wrong, then he has the ability to do some serious damage to his own cause. What he should be doing is pushing back on this point, not accepting it. If an SJW tries to push the idea that equity is the same thing as equality of outcome, what he and people like him should be saying is no. I disagree with you. Equality of outcome is not fair and therefore it is not equity. We do want an equitable society and it looks like this insert ideology here. In his case, I think it's an ideology of self-reliance and that's perfectly fine. And what he would need to say there is that equity is where all people are self-reliant and give each other equal opportunities and that we shouldn't judge each other based on identity. Simple. And this doesn't require you to portray your opponents as the good guys, which is what Peterson was effectively doing without realizing it. There's a tactic that is just silly. Anyway, that's all I have to say on this issue. Really interested in what you guys have to say, so please leave a comment in the comments section. Creasy out.